19th century London, the famed dandy and author Oscar Wilde was quoted as saying he liked to annoy the public because the public likes to be annoyed. A contemporary wrote, Oscar Wilde has ever been an eccentric man, and by his eccentricity, he became popular. This idea of fame being bestowed upon those with unconventional, even defiant attitudes and behaviors was not new then, and it isn't new now. Think about all the quote-unquote clout chasers who post thirst traps for Instagram followings, suck on gas station pumps for retweets, commit wild pranks in public spaces for YouTube, or troll the public or their social media timelines with controversial contrarian opinions. You could even think about the Kardshians, who clawed their way past predictions of only lasting 15 minutes to capitalize on the notion of famous for being famous. As we'll discover in this video, we are in an unprecedented era of celebritization and celebrity worship that has roots not in vapid millennials, but in the very fabric of America. After this, be sure to also watch The Anatomy of Stan Culture, which explores the psychology and sociology of celebrities and fans. Don't forget to hit subscribe, too. Our story of American celebrity begins in the mid-19th century. Prior to this, the most famous people in America, meaning most average people had heard of them, were war heroes, politicians, and intellectuals. Before and after the Civil War, lecturers and debaters in the Lyceum movement traveled the country promoting adult education in intellectual and moral fields, like Frederick Douglass orating on abolition. Newspapers, who largely served the upper classes, reported on such people, and the biggest ideas and accomplishments would become fodder or folklore for the lower classes. But this changed with the introduction of the penny papers, which targeted poor audiences and reshaped who and what was considered newsworthy. For instance, in the late 1840s, two New York actors were beefing, with their disagreements reported on in local penny presses. Readers were so enraptured that allegiances were drawn. In 1849, there was a riot between the two fan groups in which 22 people were killed and 150 more were injured. The police even had to call in the state militia to stop the violence. This dramatic example of what would one day be called Stan culture also reflected the growing importance of a 19th century leisure activity, theaters. Thousands were built in the second half of the 19th century, though there had been earlier stars of the stage. One was Thomas D. Daddy Rice, a minstrel performer in the 1830s who developed his song and dance style based on a slave named Jim Crow. By the 1860s, there were approximately 100 minstrel companies, and this form of racist entertainment was compelling to millions of Americans. Thanks to the invention of the telegraph in the 1830s, you could send messages about your favorite racist plays and jokes to friends and family across the country. Vaudeville consisted of traveling troupes with big-name acts to attract crowds. Reporters slowly began doing feature stories on talent and production, and such stories would be syndicated across national papers. P.T. Barnum took advantage of this when he opened his Manhattan Museum of Oddities in 1842 and regularly showcased celebrities he publicized like General Tom Thumb. Using newspaper publicity and horse-drawn carts, he created hype around a Swedish opera singer named Jenny Lind by saying she was a wholesome philanthropist. When she arrived to America for the first time in 1850, she already had so much clout that tens of thousands of people greeted her as she disembarked the ship. Hotel maids allegedly stole hair from her brushes to sell, and numerous products were named after her. In 1851, a man in Missouri sent Jenny a note card asking her for an autograph, saying he had never heard her sing, but that he wanted her signature because the name of Jenny Lind is familiar to everyone. Basically, he was a hype beast. Collecting autographs had become popular at this time thanks to expanded mail routes and lowered postal rates. For Americans of yore, receiving an autograph could provide a fan with an intimate experience similar to being tweeted by your favorite celebrity today. The 1830s and 40s saw the rise of photography, meaning everyday life and people could be captured and immortalized. People today complain about Instagram and selfie culture, but many Americans of the 19th century would have swooned for the ability to snap photos of themselves, something we know thanks to the prevalence of family portraits. But photography was expensive. If you couldn't get photos of yourself, the next best thing was to collect called carte de vista photos, or thin portraits on cards. Collection and trading of the tiny portraits was so infectious that it was known as cartomania. The cards were widely available from the 1850s to early 1900s and were sold in magazines and given away in cigarette packs. They often contained portraits of inventors, political leaders, performers, and athletes. Elizabeth Siegel wrote, "By 1863, pretty much anybody who was famous had been photographed for card pictures, and enterprising photographers and publishers sought to record the fact of new celebrities as they were made." There were about 480 newspapers in 1870, and the ability to include photos of newsworthy people increased popularity, meaning there were nearly 2,000 newspapers in 1900. Having access to newspapers introduced Americans to recurring public figures, and photographs created a sense of familiarity and intimacy. Postcards were introduced in 1861 and also included pictures of 19th century celebrities. Newspapers were awesome tools for inventors and captains of industry to reach the public and celebritize themselves. Thomas Edison utilized publicity in the late 1800s the way Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would decades later. Newspapers also challenged wealthy and famous Americans through muckraking, leading to the creation of the public relations field in the early 20th century. After Rockefeller was dragged to hell and back by an Ida Tarbell expose detailing his greedy company and attitude, he hired a publicist who cleaned up his reputation by directing him to donate large sums of money. Rockefeller also gave shiny new dimes to people he met to further sweeten his image. Robber barons like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Vanderbilt could cement their fame and win back positive reputations through huge philanthropic efforts that were reported in the news, a trend that hasn't gone away. While newspapers grew in prestige thanks to their hard-hitting exposés on important social issues, others were widely circulated because by 1906, they mostly reported on salacious scandals. Papers were filled with gossip columns. The earliest and most notorious celebrity scandal was that of Evelyn Nesbit, a model who was discovered at 14. She was the original Gibson girl, and by age 16, she was the most photographed woman of her time. In the early 1900s, monthly magazines had a circulation of 64 million readers, and most relied heavily on advertising, where Nesbit's face could be found among boxes of chocolates and face creams. She attracted the attention of a wealthy benefactor named Stanford White, who raped her and made her his mistress. They broke up a year later, and eventually Nesbit became to marry a man named Harry Thaw, who hated her association with Stanford White. So he shot and killed him on June 25, 1906. The story and subsequent trial was a media circus for over 2 years, with Nesbit switched from sweet, fresh-faced model to a woman whose beauty spelled death and ruin. Nesbit, who had wanted to move on to serious acting work, could only find work in vaudeville and a few silent films. The scandal followed her for the rest of her career. So already we see the role of mass media in not only making celebrities, but being their downfall as well. By 1907, Nickelodeons, or moving picture shows, were catching on with the public, especially in big cities. Until 1909, studios were hesitant about releasing the names of stars, but soon enough they realized that big stars would attract big crowds. Suddenly, there was talk of press opportunities and endorsements. Talent recruiters and groomers were sent out looking for people who could fit the carefully constructed roles of ingenue, rebel, or seductress. Names that were considered too ethnic or not glamorous enough were changed, as well as unsatisfactory biographical details. By 1914, there were journalistic profiles focusing on what theater and vaudeville stars ate, what they did for fun, and who they were dating. Fan magazines even took off, and studios allowed publications carefully monitored access of their actors to keep a handle on any public narratives. At the top of the 20s, there were stars like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Clara Bow, and Theda Bara signed to precious studio contracts. In 1922, the movie studios established the Hays Office because they sought respectability and wanted to reform their reputation to avoid government censorship. In addition to moral turpitude clauses in contracts that threatened to punish talent for getting out of line, the Hays Office came to accept a production code in 1930 that banned basically all the good stuff from movies. Actors faced the growing threat of slanderous gossip columns from women like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons that could destroy their career. Celebrities of the silver screen were more fascinating and glamorous in the 30s than ever, and becoming central to American lives. The Great Depression led to an increase in movie theater attendance, and celebrity narratives served as aspirational escapism. More than 60% of Americans were going to the movies every week by the early 40s. By 1948, the studio movie system and their manufactured stars were in a decline. Studios were forced to sell theater chains, leading to more independent films. Stars were released from contracts, and in the 50s they were left to create and control their own publicity. Because studios no longer controlled magazine stories and celebrities created their own personas, there was a lot more sleazy gossip. Better photography technology meant Celebritea could even be served with receipts. For example, in 1962, Elizabeth Taylor and her Cleopatra co-star Richard Burton were caught canoodling on a yacht. Both of them were married, and the headlines were international news. Paparazzi only became more numerous by the late 60s. In the past, studios could pay to block certain stories from getting widely circulated, but freedom from studio contracts came with more responsibility. Legal principles of obscenity, libel, and defamation were unclear and inconsistently applied, and many celebrities didn't bother suing magazines or papers because it meant more negative press. However, there was a celebrity who thrived on negative press in the 50s and 60s, Mariska Hargitay's mother, Jayne Mansfield. Before she died at the age of 34 in a car crash, she had appeared in 27 films, with only a few being received well. Her true fame, however, lied in her role as Kim Kardashian's ultimate predecessor. She remixed Marilyn Monroe's image by being the blonde with the most outrageous stunts. She wore a bikini in 20-degree Alaskan weather, staged wardrobe malfunctions for paparazzi, was the first star to appear nude in a film, upstaged Sophia Loren at her own party with lots of titty, and posed for Playboy. She was known to orchestrate 3 to 5 personal appearances, photo shoots, interviews, and endorsements each day. Even though her favorite color was purple, she created a pink house called the Pink Palace, which was largely furnished through endorsements and gifts. In 1964, she even appeared in a Jayne Mansfield for President campaign. We can only imagine what kind of star Jayne Mansfield would be in the 21st century, with access to Instagram and Twitter. While Jayne's acting skills and career was overshadowed by celebrities like Marilyn Monroe, the ultimate American sex symbol, Jayne redefined celebrity and how to achieve it, with one observer writing, "She has found a way to capitalize on fame, which may create an entirely new kind of star. There's not much to the part, but the pay is spectacular." Americans also loved music and radio stars. In 1921, Americans bought over 100 million records for phonograph machines, and performers became household names. But by the mid-20s, radio was the new big thing. Like newspapers decades earlier, this easily accessible mass media could be directly consumed in the home, further increasing intimate feelings between an audience and a celebrity. Because there were no visuals, radio was really important to the growth of black performers like Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith, and Duke Ellington. Many white Americans at the time would never go to a theater to see a black face on screen, but they sure did love what came to be known as race music. Bessie Smith's popularity basically saved Columbia Records from folding. Jazz became popular, but was stolen by white men like Paul Whiteman, also known as the King of Jazz. History would repeat itself in the 50s, when the rise of TV meant more available radio licenses for black stations, who catapulted black DJs and performers to community fame. These stations and the rock music they played became popular with white teens, and record executives took notice by signing white copycats like Elvis Presley. In the 1930s, the debut of the microphone allowed for crooners and singing techniques that weren't available in the vaudeville and theater performances of yesteryear. Stars like Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra scared moralists who were concerned about crooning's effects on female fans, who crowded around radios to hear their performances. But radio wasn't just for musical stars. The fictional serial Amos and Andy debuted in 1928 and was nationally popular because it was an updated version of America's favorite entertainment, minstrelsy. The two white performers who based the name of their show on a conversation between two black men in an elevator earned over $100,000 a year, around $1.6 million in today's money, to pretend to be black. The show later transitioned to television. Radio also increased the celebrity of President Roosevelt, who famously used radio for his fireside chats. Then there was a predecessor to Wendy Williams with even the same initials. Walter Winchell was a radio host who covered gossip and celebrity news and was one of the main sensationalists of the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Speaking of Charles Lindbergh, he was one of the most prominent celebrities of the period thanks to his daring airplane feats being reported in newspapers and radio. Radio talent shows became popular during the Great Depression, and Major Beau's original amateur hour premiered in 1935, promising contestants a shot at fame decades before reality TV shows promised the same thing. Over 10,000 people applied to be on the show each week, and there were only 20 spots per episode. Sports stars, who had been reported on in newspapers as early as the 1880s and 1890s, came to more prominence thanks to radio, especially in boxing and baseball. Sporting events were actually some of the first live events broadcast on radio. Boxer Joe Louis's 1938 defeat of a Nazi challenger was heard in millions of homes and catapulted him to superstardom. Joe Louis joined a small but growing league of black celebrities in the mid-20th century. These American celebrities, made possible by radio and movies, often made lots of money and got special treatment, but their hardworking and responsible images required them to sacrifice their personal politics. Being patriotic was basically non-negotiable, because appearing to be anti-American, or God forbid, pro-communist, could get an actor blacklisted from Hollywood between 1946 and the late 50s, thanks to McCarthyism. After the Hollywood blacklist faded into obscurity in the 1960s, more celebrities became politically vocal. The biggest issue of the time was the civil rights movement, and stars like Harry Belafonte, Diane Carroll, and Sidney Poitier publicly lent their support. Later, vocal actors like Jane Fonda and Paul Newman would protest the Vietnam War, and increasingly celebrities gave their opinions on elections and politics. Both movies and radio created stars, but TV would expand the influence and visibility of actors, athletes, and musical performers. It was a new way of bringing a celebrity into your home and getting to know them. The 1950 show Person to Person, a forerunner of Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous and Cribs, invited audiences into celebrity homes and personal lives. 1953 saw the first televised Academy Awards show, and red carpet coverage was introduced in 1961. But TV's also introduced regular people as potential candidates for fame. There were variety and talent shows, and the first Miss America pageant was televised in 1954. TVs could also broadcast sports coverage, creating new buzz for athletes. Meanwhile, TV programming itself was limited and had to appeal to the entire family, meaning it needed to appeal to the lowest common denominator and not offend middle-class white America. In addition to the popularity of stars like Lucille Ball, talk show, variety show, and quiz show hosts became household names, along with news anchor Walter Cronkite and briefly famous soap opera starlets. TVs increased a sense of familiarity with celebrities, especially if they were on your screen every week at a designated time. They were seen to be less glamorous and more accessible than movie stars. In 1974, People News, which later simply became People, grew its circulation by having interviews with TV stars. National Star, later Star, debuted that same year. 10 years later, Entertainment Tonight and Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous premiered. TV also came with political celebrities and activists. Eisenhower utilized TV so much that he won an Emmy in 1956. JFK blew up after his televised debate with Nixon in 1960 because he was attractive and appeared more comfortable and likable on screen. TVs allowed Americans to judge politicians not just on policy now, but appearance, personal affairs, and charisma, a trend that hasn't stopped with the creation of social media. Jackie Kennedy was herself a chic celebrity, with women copying her style and interests. The Kennedys offered unprecedented press access to the White House, and Jackie even led a tour on TV in 1962 that was viewed by over 80 million people. TV talk shows also meant that intellectuals and political activists of all stripes could appear and speak their minds. People like James Baldwin, Martin Luther King Jr., Betty Friedan, Reagan, Gloria Steinem, Phyllis Schlafly, Bill Clinton, Obama, and of course, Trump. We also can't forget TV's creation of televangelism, which catapulted many fame and money-hungry preachers into the spotlight in the 70s and 80s. TV further played a role in bringing rock music to the mainstream because performers could appear on talk and variety shows. When it was announced that the Beatles would be appearing on a February 1964 episode of The Ed Sullivan Show, the studio received over 50,000 requests for seats, and only 700 lucky people got them. It was a few weeks after Kennedy's assassination, and most of the audience was comprised of viciously screaming female baby boomers. Teenagers were an emerging market and cultural group who didn't care about their parents' music, and parents hated pretty much all of their music. More genres would emerge, and the 70s gave way to stadium rock and another unfortunate phenomenon, groupie culture. Mick Jagger, Rod Stewart, Iggy Pop, Alice Cooper, and Randy California were just some of the rockers who openly associated with or engaged in the sexual abuse of underage girls known as baby groupies. A short-lived 1973 magazine, Star, covered the escapades, advice, and style of LA's teenage groupie scene. The 15-year-old Lori Maddie and 14-year-old Sable Starr were most prominent and embodied parental fears of that no-good evil rock music. Studio executives attempted to provide an alternative, manufacturing squeaky clean bubblegum stars like David Cassidy of the Partridge Family, who served as a contrast to hypersexual and weirdo rock stars who mess with teenagers or mess with gender roles by wearing makeup. Capitalizing on the teen market and their hormones, publishers put out teeny bopper magazines like Tiger Beat and Teen Beat. As cable TV came onto the scene, there was a wider variety of content that produced more noticeable figures of varying niches. A prime example is Dr. Ruth, the elderly sexpert who originally had a popular radio show before becoming a nationally recognized TV host in the late 80s. MTV arrived in 1981, and music videos made singers even more popular. MTV video jockeys also became celebrities in their own right. As for musicians, they could be outrageous and really attract fans in a way that hadn't been done before. Like Jayne Mansfield in tabloids a few decades earlier, Madonna used the music video medium to stir controversy and attract press. She, of course, also appeared on a plethora of television programs and award shows to further gain attention. MTV barely broadcast black artists, by the way, who weren't Michael Jackson, Prince, or Donna Summer, and rejected submissions from artists like Rick James. This didn't change until the mid-80s. CNN, the first 24-hour news channel, premiered in 1980, and stories that previously wouldn't have been given any airtime can now dominate the news cycle. For example, America watched for 58 hours while baby Jessica was trapped in a Texas well. During the 90s, 24-hour news further made 15-minute celebrities out of members of the O.J. Simpson trial, Tanya Harding, Marla Maples, and Monica Lewinsky, whether the subjects wanted the attention or not. Speaking of O.J., his trial and acquittal continued the long-running conversation about the benefit of doubt afforded to celebrities, especially in the black community. But that could be a whole video in itself. So TV increased the visibility of celebrities of all kinds, and this had a few effects. For one, many celebrities to the average American were more identifiable than some intellectuals or politicians. And in the case of figures like Ronald Reagan, celebrity and politics even blended together. Secondly, music stars could expand their reach via media synergy. For instance, the Spice Girls, manufactured to make money in various lanes with a veneer of authenticity, made movies, collected endorsements, and appeared regularly on TV shows to widen their audience. In the early decades of fame, TV and radio stars usually didn't cross over. Thirdly, the pressure for celebrities to stay relevant in daily news tabloids and television shows like Entertainment Tonight meant there was more incentive to be controversial, provocative, and even downright outrageous. Politicians appeared on late-night shows clothing got skimpier than ever on red carpets, and publicity stunts were pulled. Jayne Mansfield's methods of attaining stardom would prove to be a blueprint for celebrities who couldn't rely on stage presence or talent alone. And of course, this would trickle down to average members of the great unwashed masses. That's right, bring on the reality stars. A popular quote wrongly attributed to Andy Warhol is, "In the future, everybody will be world famous for 15 minutes. He didn't say it, but the idea accurately describes modern-day fame and attempts to achieve it. A 2007 study found that fame was the #1 value communicated to preteens on popular TV, confirming in later findings that fame was the #1 goal for their future. A survey mentioned that over 30% of 14 to 18-year-olds admitted to thinking they are likely to be famous one day. This was before Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram surged to popularity, before achieving viral fame became possible for just about anyone who happened to be in the right place at the right time. We've been on this track for a long time, with radio and television talent shows of the mid-20th century offering a glimpse of what was to come. So in the 80s, personalities increasingly used events, controversy, or proximity to famous people to clinch their moments of celebrity in niche groups, or to capture the mainstream's attention, even if it was fleeting. There was Angeline, a singer and model who went the 1980s version of viral when sexy photos of her popped up on billboards around LA. Elvira, a campy and sexy goth horror character played by Cassandra Peterson, went from fringe celeb to nationally recognized with endorsement deals, movies, and merchandise during the 80s and 90s. John Wayne Bobbitt tried forming a band after his wife infamously cut his dick off, and when that failed, he did porn. Jessica Hahn, who was raped by the televangelist Jim Baker, went on to do Playboy, guest star in shows like Married with Children, and appear on The Howard Stern Show. Speaking of Howard Stern, he was one of many so-called shock jocks, perplexing and captivating the general public with vulgar and politically incorrect shows. The arrival of 1992's Real World began our modern-day obsession with watching strangers cohabitate and disagree. The key figure to emerge from the show was Pedro Zamora, an openly gay man living with AIDS. By the time he appeared on the show, he had given hundreds of lectures about AIDS prevention, and he hoped appearing on the show would help other people and get his message out. He died a few hours after the season finale aired. He had millions of supporters, and numerous foundations, funds, and community programs were established after his death in his honor. Zamora's strategic use of reality TV to advance his cause demonstrates the way average people can now access public platforms. Increasingly, being a personality with an interesting backstory, worthy cause, or scandalous problem trumped discernible talent. This was the case of Anna Nicole Smith, who shot to fame after appearing in Playboy and Guess Jeans ads and marrying an 89-year-old oil tycoon. Of course, non-regular beautiful people like models had long fascinated the public, demonstrated by the marketing power of the so-called Big Six supermodels of the early 1990s. The women built fortunes on beauty and their personal brands. Anna also sought to do this and became a fixture on red carpet events and in magazines, and appeared in low-budget movies and TV shows, something many earlier Playboy models could have never done. But it was Anna Nicole's vicious and scandalous legal battle with her late husband's estate that Americans were bloating themselves on in the 90s. The affairs of regular people had become just as compelling as that of movie stars and musicians, further evidenced by the immense popularity of talk shows like Jerry Springer and Ricky Lake. Writer George Packer said the modern person evolves into a persona, then a brand, then an empire, with the business imperative of grow or die. By the time Survivor and American Idol rolled around, the concept of regular people without conventional talents achieving national fame at the sacrifice of privacy or dignity was routine in the 2000s. You didn't have to sing, act, dance, or play a sport, but if you were attractive or entertaining, dating competition shows were all the rage, with competitors believing appearing on the show would jumpstart their careers as actors, singers, or the newest craze, TV personalities. Celebrity chefs like Emeril and Ina Garten capitalized on their unique attributes in the growth of the Food Network. There were too many remixes and copycats of The Real World to keep count, and random wealthy teenagers in California beach towns could land magazine covers. Rich socialites dumbed themselves down and orchestrated paparazzi photo ops. As the internet grew in influence, bloggers and commentators with healthy audiences found themselves being invited to entertainment industry events or bestowed with permission to write articles for prestigious publications without journalism degrees. In the hip-hop world, attractive women in music videos, known as video vixens, could harness their fame into party hosting gigs and modeling opportunities, or even movie parts. And yes, here's where I insert a blurb about that family that has strategically extended sex tape controversy into a reality empire with antics that Jayne Mansfield would applaud. The history I presented you with in this episode is nowhere near exhaustive, but it illustrates for you how for the past 2 centuries, celebrities have been made possible by changes in technology and leisure activity. 50 to 60 years ago, the new celebrities were TV stars, whose fame seemed cheap and novel in comparison to film stars. It parallels social media celebrities, who are frequently told that they aren't real celebrities. Despite their fans and money, when social media celebrities get invited to events like the Met Gala, noses crinkle at such people mingling with A-list actors or musicians. Social media fame can happen to anybody, though the results of such fame range from horrific slander to adoring fans and multi-million-dollar deals with major companies. This reality, despite the slim chances of sustainable wealth or fame being possible for everyone, is what entices the clout chasers. In the golden age of radio and movies, most of today's clout chasers would be thinned out by impossibly high industry standards that were racist, classist, and misogynistic. TV's accessibility, and later the internet's, put fame more in reach for average Americans and made it less exclusive. If anybody can indeed become famous, and we know internet isn't going anywhere, what does this mean for our country? Celebrities, once relegated to newspapers and movie screens, safely out of reach from comment or rabid fans, are now ingrained in our daily lives. Whether it's A-list celebrities tweeting next to social media famous stars about their dislike of vaccines to influence public opinion, the president and his antics, or celebrity activists opining on news shows without correct information, no single American is immune to celebrity culture. In The Anatomy of a Stan, I discuss the different theories of why people generally gravitate towards celebrities. There are a complex web of reasons, but the ultimate and most obvious outcome of celebrity culture is a normalized imbalance of power that can shift political policy and shape public discourse. At this point, American celebrity has fused with American history and politics, and we can't keep ignoring that. I had such a difficult time writing this script because there were so many bits of history that I had to leave out to keep this video from being super long. So there are a lot of other topics regarding celebrity, race, gender, and class that I could explore. So if you like this content and want more like it, be sure to like this video and leave a comment. Want to see more great long format videos like this? Well, you can, over on Patreon, where a $1 to $3 monthly pledge grants you access to exclusive videos and essays. Plus, your pledge produces more great free content like this. Check the link in the description box below for more information. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe.